Shannon Doherty showed the industry that intensity on screen was a choice, one she made every single day, costs and all. Suzanne Summers. She built a career on being underestimated, then outlasted almost everyone who doubted her. Elvis Presley changed what presence meant, not just in music, but in every room he ever walked into. Some performers rewrite the rules just by showing up. Olivia Newton-John made warmth look effortless. It never was. Toby Keith knew exactly who he was on stage and never apologized for it. In a world full of reinvention, that kind of conviction becomes its own form of mastery. Loretta Lynn came from nothing and built everything on the sheer force of telling the truth. Coal Miner's Daughter, American Original. There is a scene in Pulp Fiction, you know the one, where a man in a suit recites scripture before pulling a trigger, and the entire cinema seemed to hold its breath. Not because of the violence, because of the voice, because of the absolute, unhurried certainty in every syllable. That moment did not come from inspiration. It came from decades of grinding, failing, rebuilding, and refusing to walk away from the craft. Samuel Leroy Jackson was born on December 21st, 1948, in Washington, D.C., and raised primarily in Chattanooga, Tennessee, by his maternal grandparents and mother. It was not a house full of chaos, but it was not insulated from the pressures of the American South during the Civil Rights era either. He grew up watching the world around him demand that black men make themselves smaller, quieter, less visible. He would spend his entire professional life doing the opposite. He attended Morehouse College in Atlanta, originally intending to study marine biology. Then he saw a production, stepped into a rehearsal room, and felt something shift. He changed his major to drama. That pivot sounds simple in retrospect, but it was the beginning of a discipline that would take nearly 2 more decades to fully materialize on screen. At Morehouse, Jackson was not simply a drama student. He was politically engaged, participating in the civil rights movement, and at one point, in 1969, holding members of the Morehouse Board of Trustees hostage during a demonstration demanding curriculum reform. He was briefly expelled. Martin Luther King Sr. was among those held. The consequence was real, suspension, but so was the conviction. Even then, Jackson was not someone who did things halfway. He moved to New York after graduating, and what followed was the part of Samuel L. Jackson's story that his public image tends to obscure. The image the world eventually came to know, the commanding presence, the controlled ferocity, the man who seems to have been born with that voice already fully formed, was assembled slowly, piece by piece, in off-Broadway theaters and small regional productions through the 1970s and early 1980s. The roles were small. The paychecks were modest. The recognition was nearly non-existent. During that period, Jackson's private life carried a weight that his professional ambition could not fully outrun. He struggled with substance abuse, cocaine, and alcohol, a battle he has spoken about publicly over the years with unusual directness and without self-pity. He did not romanticize the addiction or deploy it as backstory mythology. He has described it plainly. It was a problem that nearly ended everything. His wife, LaTanya Richardson, whom he married in 1980, was central to getting him into treatment. He entered a rehabilitation program in the early 1990s. That detail matters not as tragedy, but as turning point. Because what came after it was not a slow climb. It was an eruption. In 1991, Spike Lee cast Jackson in Jungle Fever as Gator, a crack-addicted man whose disintegration was horrifying precisely because Jackson played it without apology or sentimentality. He did not telegraph the character's damage, he inhabited it. He won the first ever Best Supporting Actor award at the Cannes Film Festival for that role. Critics who had seen him work for years on stage took notice. Hollywood took notice more slowly. Then came 1994. Quentin Tarantino, who had already worked with Jackson in a smaller capacity, cast him as Jules Winnfield in Pulp Fiction. What Tarantino gave Jackson was not just a role. It was architecture, a character built for the specific frequency of Jackson's presence. And Jackson delivered something that the film industry had not quite seen before. A supporting performance so kinetic, so precisely calibrated, so completely inhabited, that it did not feel like supporting anything. It felt like the gravitational center of the entire film. Pulp Fiction changed the public perception of who Samuel L. Jackson was, but the perception had always lagged behind the reality. The reality was a man who had been working at a professional level for 20-plus years before that camera rolled. The Ezekiel monologue, memorized, refined, paced, owned, was not improvised charisma. It was the product of a craftsman who understood that the difference between a good performance and an unforgettable one is the willingness to do the preparation that no one ever sees. After Pulp Fiction, the offers multiplied. Die Hard with a Vengeance, A Time to Kill, Jackie Brown, The Long Kiss Goodnight, Unbreakable. Jackson moved through genres with a fluency that spoke to technique more than typecast. He was not repeating himself, he was demonstrating range by consistently choosing projects where character tension, not just presence, was the engine. What became apparent across those mid to late 1990s films was a quality that is genuinely rare. Jackson could be the most interesting person in a scene without stealing it. He understood ensemble dynamics at a level that actors with far fewer credits often miss. He knew when to hold, when to fill space, and when to let silence carry the weight. That is not instinct, that is study. The public image that crystallized through the late 1990s and into the 2000s was one of invincibility, the cool, unflappable, occasionally terrifying presence who seemed to operate at a different frequency than everyone else on screen. What sat beneath that image was a level of professional seriousness that bordered on rigorous. Jackson is known to be consistently, almost legendarily, prepared on set. He arrives knowing the material. He does not waste takes. Crews talk about his work ethic with a kind of respectful awe. Directors describe working with him as efficient in the best possible sense. He brings full commitment immediately, every time. He took the role of Nick Fury in the Marvel Cinematic Universe beginning in 2008, and what could have been a paycheck franchise obligation became something else. Jackson brought genuine gravity to a character who functioned primarily as a connective tissue figure across an enormous ensemble. He made Fury specific, a man defined by institutional loyalty, moral ambiguity, and the burden of knowing too much. Across more than a dozen MCU appearances, he never phoned it in. That alone is worth noting. There is also the matter of volume. Samuel L. Jackson holds a Guinness World Record for the highest-grossing actor of all time, based on box office totals. The number is genuinely staggering. Films he has appeared in have collectively grossed over $30 billion worldwide. The public tends to receive that statistic as a fun fact. It is actually something more revealing. It speaks to a career built on consistent professional delivery at every level of production, from prestige drama to blockbuster franchise to independent film. Jackson has not managed his career from the safe position of selective prestige. He has worked broadly, frequently, and with sustained quality, regardless of the scale of the production. He has spoken in interviews about his philosophy of work. Show up, be prepared, do your job, move to the next one. That sounds almost deceptively simple, but in an industry that rewards volatility, ego, and the performance of artistic torment, consistent professionalism is quietly radical. It is also, historically, harder than it looks. His collaboration with Quentin Tarantino has remained one of the defining creative partnerships of his career. Jackie Brown, Django Unchained, The Hateful Eight. In each of these, Jackson was handed material of genuine complexity and delivered performances that are still analyzed for their construction. The Hateful Eight in particular gave him one of the most morally complex characters in Tarantino's catalog, and Jackson committed to every layer of it with the same focus he brought to Jules Winnfield 20 years earlier. There is something worth acknowledging about the arc of recognition in his career. He was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for Pulp Fiction, and did not win. He has not won a competitive Oscar. He received an honorary Oscar, the Academy's Honorary Award, in 2022, a belated formal acknowledgement from an institution that, for various reasons, did not always move quickly in his direction. He accepted it with the same directness he brings to everything. The absence of competitive wins did not alter his output or his standards. He simply kept working at the same level. What you see on screen when you watch Samuel L. Jackson, whether it is the controlled menace of a Tarantino villain, the moral gravity of a superhero handler, the barely contained fury of a courtroom drama, or the dark comedy of a scene that should not be as funny as he makes it, is the output of someone who treats the craft as a serious professional obligation rather than an expressive playground. The boldness is real. So is the discipline underneath it. He has been married to LaTanya Richardson since 1980. Their daughter, Zoe Jackson, was born in 1982. He has spoken with consistent warmth about his family, without making that warmth a performance. The private life remains genuinely private in a world where that is increasingly difficult to sustain. He is also, by multiple accounts, someone who genuinely loves movies, not as artifacts of his own achievement, but as a medium. He talks about performance with the specificity of someone who pays close attention to what other actors do, who watches carefully, who is still engaged by the question of how it works, and why some performances land and others don't. That kind of sustained curiosity is not universal in a 40-year career. It is, arguably, the most important factor in staying interesting. Samuel L. Jackson did not burst onto the screen as a finished product. He arrived after 20 years of unglamorous preparation, survived a crisis that could have ended everything, and then went on to build one of the most durable, wide-ranging, seriously executed careers in the history of American film. The voice you hear in the cinema, steady, authoritative, layered with something the camera seems to recognize even when the character is saying nothing, is not a gift. It is the accumulated result of a man who decided, somewhere in a rehearsal room in the early 1970s, that he was going to do this work properly. He has not stopped deciding that since. The story is not finished. He continues to work, to choose projects, to show up prepared, and to deliver. Whatever comes next will be built the same way everything before it was built, from the inside out, with the craft leading and the image following.